It's week 7 of the Hearthstone Global Games. We are getting right close to the end now, and as we get there, we want to see you guys cheering for your team. So let's get straight in to HGG Cheer, which we told you all about yesterday.
Yeah, we saw a reaction to this that I think neither of us was expecting, in a pretty insane amount of bits being cheered altogether. To most Europeans' chagrin, United States far in the lead. I believe that's actually a non-updated amount there that we have for the United States. It's what it was yesterday, and now they have soared miles into the lead, very impressively. Oh no, wait, that is the new one. Sorry, I read that wrong. I read that as 200,000. That is 2 million. Yeah. Sorry, my mistake. That is absolutely insane.
And that's still not up to date, I believe, as obviously the bits are being donated constantly. This will have been updated like 30 minutes ago or something, and I think since then, United States have surpassed 3 million, possibly even. But yeah, bits has been very exciting. I'm, again, looking forward to spending my bits later on, but I've got to encourage you guys to make sure you're cheering on your teams while they're playing, because that's something that I think could be a real community thing with the bits.
Yeah, it's good, fun to have the leaderboard on there, see who can come up in front. UK was in second place for a while there. I believe we've been usurped now.
But yeah, if you are a New Zealand fan or a Chinese Taipei fan, get ready to be spending your bits very soon. But let's take a look at the Hearthstone Global Games format as we are approaching Stage 2. Stage 1 was 48 teams. It was 6 rounds of Swiss. It was 6 weeks, but we now enter week 7. It's going to be Stage 2. We have 4 groups with 4 teams. It's going to be a 3-round dual tournament. It's double elimination. Lose 2 matches and your team is out. But win 2 and you make it to the top 8.
Yeah, nice and simple double elimination like you have seen for the top 8 at playoffs during recent weeks. No messing about with Swiss anymore. This is just nice and simple. 2 wins and ins and 2 losses, and you go home or stay at home, I guess, because players are playing from home. But if they win, they shall be playing from BlizzCon at the grand finals. It is going to be a spectacle, to be sure.
Let's take a look at the top 16 teams and see the groups that these teams have been placed in. Group A, B, C, and D all presented. They're in front of you. They're in their order of seed. So for Group A, for example, Brazil is the top seed, Portugal is the bottom seed. I think, as we all know, Brazil's actually the top seed out of everyone, and Portugal was the bottom seed out of everyone, coming in as the 16th team. So they will be playing against each other first. That is how the seeding works out. We're going to be seeing a lot of these games coming up today.
Yeah, the big one for me is definitely going to be Norway versus Ukraine as the 3rd game of the day, I believe. That's going to be a big one. We had a vote yesterday, I believe, in which it was 48% of Twitch chat believed Norway would win, 52% believed Ukraine would win. Very, very contentious match, and I can't wait to get into it later on.
Let's take a look at that game and everything else that we have coming up today. Starting off, as I referenced earlier, New Zealand versus Chinese Taipei. Then Hong Kong going to be taking on the United Kingdom. Then the game Derek, and I think all of us really are looking forward to, it's Norway versus Ukraine. Following that, Bulgaria versus my team, the Netherlands. That's where I will be spending my bits and cheering on my team. And then Singapore versus Sottel's team. And clearly the favorite, at least if the bits are anything to go by, Singapore versus the United States.
Yeah, well, you know, we like to go for quality of bits rather than quantity, I think so. It's fair to say.
The bits that you did yesterday during the community show, they were some quality bits.
Spicy ones, one might say.
Yeah.
But I believe before we get into any of those matches, we have got the first match of the day, as you saw, Chinese Taipei up against New Zealand. Bit of an interesting match because New Zealand's ones have been some of the more exciting ones in the global games, I think it's fair to say, even though they were one of the lesser hyped up teams, I think it's fair to say, at the start of the global games. They have been playing some pretty cool Hearthstone, and they actually have a pretty stacked roster of players as well.
Let's take a look at the bracket for this group just to show you how this is going to go down. So New Zealand versus Chinese Taipei, Singapore versus the United States happening later on today. The winners will be playing against each other. The winner of that match will be qualifying to BlizzCon. And then talk us through the losers bracket, Derek.
Yeah, so it's pretty simple. Just if you lose again once you are in the losers bracket, you will be eliminated from the Hearthstone Global Games. And I think in my anticipation, in terms of the quality of players, I would expect it to be Chinese Taipei and United States qualifying through. Not to take anything away from the other teams, but United States is clearly such an insanely talented group of players. Just Saiyin's week of dominance that we saw with his DreamHack victory, then following on to qualifying for the full championships as well. And I mean, Chinese Taipei, they have the world champion, so clearly no slouches either. Whereas Singapore and New Zealand, while they have had a couple of results, they got, you know, a tour-stop victory under their belt. Still, I think, going to be struggling against the Titans of Taipei in America.
All right, Derek, I know how much you love talking about Chinese Taipei. Let's take a look at the teams where you can talk me through them a little bit more.
Well, we've got Tom60229, as I said, the current champion, HQ Shaxi, who I don't have the most up-to-date information, may not currently be the absolute #1 APAC points earner, but is definitely right up there. He was #1 in APAC a couple weeks ago at least. It's kind of a bit of a contentious race between him and Dak Rivius, who, due to his success at playoffs, may have overtaken him at this point. But a very, very strong player. And on the other side, for New Zealand, we've got also some pretty respectable players. Mage 1 game away, I believe, from qualifying through to the World Championships last year after falling to Ant. And then on the other side, Jack Attack, I believe, a tour stop victor that we have here on the New Zealand side. And obviously Patra as well. We know her to be a very respected member amongst the Hearthstone community, both competitively and just personality-wise. She's a very lively person, successful streamer. We like Patra a lot.
And of course, we've seen her in the intro video for the Hearthstone Global Games every week with her laugh. Yeah, she's a great streamer. And again, New Zealand have done a great job to get this far. Like you said yesterday they'd been, what, cursed with some tricky games.
Some weird games.
Weeks. Some weird games of Hearthstone, right the way back from week #1, where they had the Shadowwalk Shaman that just would not win. It just refused to win the game. I think it went off like 7 or 8 times. Each time Zola put it back in the hand, but Grumble didn't work, and then eventually even the Zola didn't work. It was a very weird game. Right the way back in week 1. Since then, we've had 6 more weeks of the Hearthstone Global Games. Let's take a look at what the meta is looking like now, though, as we look at these teams' picks and bans.
Yeah, we just got these in ourselves, so I haven't had a chance to have much of a look at them, but they're Chinese Taipei's Hunter being banned away. It is the Death Rattle Hunter, so clearly New Zealand are afraid of the anti-control strategy somewhat, which makes sense. They've opted to go for Shadowwalk Shaman as opposed to a more aggressive good or even Shaman, if you will. They've got the Quest Rogue as opposed to Odd Rogue. They haven't even gone for Odd Paladin. We see one of the few mid-range control-y mech paladin.
Kangor's Endless Army.
Yeah, this is a cool deck relying around Meccano Egg and even a Meat Wagon, quite primarily. You got your meat and eggs. Can we call it Breakfast Paladin? Is that something we can do?
Let's do it. We've made the executive decision. Let's take a look, though, at how these decks are lining up.
Did you say executive decision?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Brilliant.
Let's go
that was a hilarious joke, mate. As getting into it, we do have the first match, that very cool Breakfast Paladin with its Meat Wagon and Meccano Egg thrown in there, up against the Odd Rogue for Chinese Taipei as well. So it's going to be testing the anti-aggro capabilities of Mech Paladin, because most of the time I've seen this deck be played, it's been against the more control-ish decks, I think, and it's done pretty well because there is a huge amount of value in this Mechanical Egg Paladin.
Yeah, against Odd Rogue, though, it's going to be tricky. How much defensive capability does the deck actually have?
Quite a lot, because this entire deck relies around the fact that there is little silence in the current meta. If you go for Bronze Gatekeeper on a Meccano Egg, or if you can stick down an Annoyo module, put a Spike Ridge Seed on that, whatever, there is a huge amount of buff potential in this deck, which the Odd Rogue can suffer with. Valspine is really their only recourse to be able to deal with one of those high health minions, and actually, taking a look at it, the Void Ripper that they have as well. So this match from New Zealand, the Egg Paladin from them, the mechanical mid-range Egg Paladin up against the Odd Rogue, I think could be fairly close. There's a lot of game on both sides.
So after that, we have Pathra on the Death Rattle Hunter versus Shaxi on what is a straight-up Togwaggle Druid. And that is a matchup that I've heard a lot of Druid players complaining about recently. Like, Togwaggle Druid, or Druids in general, struggle against Death Rattle Hunter.
Yeah, they do indeed. You generally just have too many large minions populating the board in the mid-game, and you don't have enough removal as the Druid to fight back against it. I find that the Malagos variant can have a little bit of a better game against the Death Rattle Hunter, because if you can get down an early twig, you can just kill them. You can just go for a big combo with Malagos, Floop, maybe an Alexstrasza thrown in there. As long as you can survive till that point, which is not the hard part, you should be fine. Togwaggle Druid also has the survivability, but the problem is that their ultimate endgame win condition is a lot less effective against Hunter, because if you swap the decks, steal their hand, brilliant, great job, they still probably have 4 King Crushers on the board, and you're then still dead.
And even so, like, even without the King Crushers, they could have Rexar going, building some beasts, getting more and more aggression. It can even be difficult for the Druid to find the time to play the Togwaggle and play the Azalina. It's a tricky one, as I believe we are just about getting ready to start this series. One more time, it's double elimination, so loser of this series isn't out of the Hearthstone Global Games, but they're going to have a much harder time qualifying to BlizzCon.
They are indeed, and I cannot wait to get into this first game of the series. This very cool deck from Jack Attack. It's been a while since we've seen old Uthi and his Ebon Blade. I don't know, whenever people pronounce that, they always put a real stank on the Bon. It's always the Ebon Blade.
I say Ebon.
Yeah, Ebon Blade. Yeah, like ebony.
I've never heard him called Uthi, though.
Uthi? Yeah, that's just to his close friends.
Ah, yeah, that's fair.
To his really close friends, he's just off.
Oh, is that why Lorinda pronounces his name strangely?
But not really the hand that Jack Attack is looking for to get this game rolling. Once some of the more early cards, the anti-aggro cards, the Mechano Egg, you only really want to be summoning off of the Meat Wagon, ideally. Christology is an interesting inclusion in this deck list, because I think when people first saw Christology, they were expecting a kind of aggressive style of card where you refill your hand with these cheap, small, token aggressive minions. But what people have realized is it's just good in these control decks, because you can have, in this deck, Bronze Gatekeeper, Stonehill Defender, Meat Wagon as well. There's a lot of good cards in here. And if you're going for a more spell buff variant, people have realized Christology with 7 mana 1/1. I am completely drawing a blank on the name here.
Oh, Linessa.
Linessa, there we go. Sorry, I do apologize. Linessa is fantastic with Christology.
Yeah, I mean, the cards that you can search with Christology just tend to be pretty good. Meat Wagon is an example that we're seeing there. Meat Wagon tutors out the Mechano Egg. That is good. That is good strategy. On the other side of things, though, Chinese Taipei have a handful of 1-mana cards, which is... yeah, that's pretty good for the Odd Rogues.
It's not bad. I think you would quite happily gobble this up as Chinese Taipei, and they are going real aggressive right at the start, because I think they've realized, as for the history of Hearthstone has been one of the biggest weaknesses of Control Paladin, is it has to do stuff in big chunks. It can clear off the board pretty much better than any other class with a quality Consecrate, I suppose, Psychic Scream not included. It has fantastic board clears, but it's all expensive. It's all overkill. So if you go all in really early on at the start, you might be able to just burst them down before they get any of those board clears active. Yeah,
and that does look like it's going to be a distinct possibility here, as New Zealand drawing that Mechano Egg is one of the worst things they could have drawn last turn. Yeah, Christology's gotten them 2 Stonehill Defenders. Maybe they can stall out with these taunts, but the thing is, Tom's minions are going to be so much more powerful than Jack Attack's. Jack Attack's going to need a Pyromancer as soon as possible to clear this board.
And those Stonehill Defenders were the bad cards to draw. He wanted Bronze Gatekeepers, because then as soon as the Mechano Egg is pulled out by the Meat Wagon,
it's true.
You slam that bad boy down, and you are feeling pretty happy indeed. Also worth mentioning, there are 2 Void Rippers in New Zealand's deck, clearly for some surprise lethal opportunities, I would imagine. Also in addition to just popping their own eggs, if that's necessary.
Tom took a while there with that turn, but ultimately decided that a weapon isn't important. Let's just make a 5-1 Divine Shield, and that's looking good to me.
It was really just which one drop do you play, and playing the Argent Squire, sure, you're less vulnerable to a Consecration on the next turn. I think it's just fine.
But look how weak Stonehill Defender is now. Like, Jack Attack slams that down. Chinese Taipei can just go ahead and play the hero power, play Deadly Poison, get rid of it, and continue to hit the face with these powerful minions. Well, I say powerful minions, they're all 1-drops.
They're pretty good.
One of them has 5 attack, though.
But are you expecting Stonehill to be good when you play it? It's
No.
a Silverback Patriarch. It's literally a meme of a card because of how bad it is. Obviously, Stonehill Defender is not a bad card because you get a fantastic result outside of that. But in terms of the immediate benefit onto the board, this is really not what Jack Attack is looking for. As you pointed out, a Pyromancer anytime soon would be pretty lovely.
In the meantime, though, that Void Ripper going to be used to flip that Argent Squire. It's now a 1-5. So it's not going to be dealing 5 damage. However, that Blood Knight pickup. Okay, now I need to look at New Zealand's deck list again. Are there any Divine Shields worth saving the Blood Knight for?
Yeah, you got a Noya module.
Yep.
And you got Celiax.
Okay, okay.
Which is definitely worth considering saving it for.
But playing a 9-9, a 3-mana 9-9, how can you not make that play?
It's not perfect, though, is it? You lose your Divine Shields, which makes you more vulnerable to Consecration, while Pyro
if he draws
shenanigans.
Pyromancer, then Pyromancer quality dealing with the 9-9 would be a big
that's
problem.
very, very bad for you.
Oh, God, this is a tough turn.
It is a really tough turn. And like you said, Blood Knight could be good on a subsequent turn. So maybe we see Deadly Poison with the dagger on this turn to take out the minion, push everything else through to face. Then next turn, you could follow up with the Blood Knight.
Okay, Derek, that's a sensible play.
Yeah.
Counterpoint, 3-mana 9-9. Let's go.
It's this is always, I think, a downside of my aggressive play, is I am just always too cautious. I am afraid that they will have the answer, as we can see. Jack Attack does clearly have here, not the perfect answer with the Pyro thrown in there as well, but good enough to slow this down drastically. And now, Tom60229 is kind of left high and dry without much way to develop.
It's fine. 3-mana 9-9. That, my friend, was a world champion play, as he now follows up with the Vicious Fledgling. Given that one quality's been used up, this board should be quite difficult to deal with. A Consecration on its own isn't going to deal with the Vicious Fledgling, but the Pyromancer picked him off the top there. Can Jack Attack afford to use it with equality this turn? That's the question. So that's it. That's both the qualities gone if he does.
But how much follow-up is there likely to be from your opponent?
True.
Vicious Fledgling is probably the scariest thing you're going to see. Cobalt Scalebane is very rarely run anymore. As we can see, it's obviously not represented from Chinese Taipei. So their individual refill on the board is probably going to be very underwhelming. And underwhelming it is.
If there was a Myra's Unstable Element draw on that turn, it would have been played, I think, almost definitely, just to try and lock down the win.
Even then, maybe not necessarily. Like, this is a good push onto the board that's being made by Tom. You want to develop, then he goes with Myra, maybe he gets a Leroy to close out the game.
Now that Christology draw is interesting, because that is now a guaranteed draw 2 Bronze Gatekeepers, as Jack Attack takes another Bronze Gatekeeper as well. He's going to need to play around Valspine Slayer a little bit. He's not going to want to layer these Gatekeepers all on one minion. However, New Zealand can now play Mechano Egg, Gatekeeper that, play Meat Wagon, Gatekeeper that, maybe even play another Gatekeeper separately, just to have as many taunts as possible.
Yeah, they really do just want to go as wide as possible with the taunts, because like you said, they are a little bit vulnerable to Valspine, but in terms of wide boards of taunts, I suppose Void Ripper is really the only draw that Tom60229 can get to hope to pull that back in his favor. And even then, he has to have a board for Void Ripper to actually do much of anything. Clearly a bit of a difficult choice for New Zealand. All of these cards actually have merit. Frostwolf Grunt is the cheapest, but I would argue probably the worst out of this selection in this scenario. Mogushan Warden, if you think it's going to be all low attack, is the way to go. I don't think Mogushan is the way to go, because if they play anything decently statted at all, it's a little bit too sad.
Speaking of decently statted though, Funkelmancer does its job here. They're clearing up the whole board again. Jack Attack is under threat of lethal from some of the various cards in Tom's deck.
No one drop to be thrown down with the Spike Ridged Steedo quite yet. So maybe we just see Gatekeeper Stegodon.
Yeah.
It's a fine play. You probably stay alive and then Hero Power Spike Ridged Steed next turn.
That's definitely the play that catches my eye, because what actually kills New Zealand through that? I don't think anything does.
How does it go wrong? If you get one drop Vilespined, it kills off the Stegodon. Gatekeeper still tanks both the hits and you're alive. It would have to be like Acarus Veteran, which obviously isn't even played in Odd Rogue. I'm struggling to see much that you lose to there. It's really just Myra's unstable element, I think, at this point that they have to be afraid of.
Cold Blood Valspine, but Jack Attack still survives through that. Taking a little bit of a risk there with the Meat Wagon, but even so, one-drop Valspine is not going to be lethal unless the one-drop's Cold Blood. No, even if the one-drop's Cold Blood, it still wouldn't be lethal.
I suppose they're thinking this is a safe enough play. As long as they don't die, they are happy. They just need to make sure they don't go down to 2 health, or even 4 health, actually, I suppose, for double SI7 agent, because that's the only burst damage that can be done over the top of taunts in Odd Rogue. It's all very much minion and buff based.
I'm curious now. So this doesn't necessarily set up the Mechano Egg, because the Meat Wagon has 2 attacks, which means it could summon a Bronze Gatekeeper, which would be much, much worse.
I agree. They're really just using it as a taunt wall at the moment, though. It's good enough.
However, if New Zealand play the Christology this turn, then it once again will guarantee the Mechano Egg.
Oh yeah, good point.
Some interesting Meat Wagon maths going on here.
Yeah, so maybe we see Christology Ziliax on this turn, because it heals you up to a very respectable health total.
So are you playing Ziliax as a magnetic minion here or separately? Because if you play it as a magnetic minion, it once again messes up the Meat Wagon. It could summon a lot of different minions now.
Oh yeah, that's true.
So I think if he's playing it separately, but maybe I'm overthinking the Meat Wagon? Yeah, clearly New Zealand think I'm overthinking the Meat Wagon.
Whatever you do here, as long as you set up a big taunt wall, you're just not dying. I think worrying about summoning the Mechano Egg is a little bit too... You're overthinking the play at that point.
Yep.
This is your win condition. It's just this giant minion which is stuck in the way, and Chinese Taipei have absolutely no way to get through it.
With the buff on the Meat Wagon, now a Noya module is a minion that could be summoned by it. That would be fine. You know, an extra taunt with Divine Shield when this dies. That seems like it's a good outcome for Jack Attack now.
That Spike Ridge Steed is such a good card.
I found that on ladder, people have sometimes forgotten how Spike Ridge Steed works as well, because it's not been around for such a long time. Like, I found people will clear my minion that's been Spike Ridge Steeded, and then try and hit face, and then, oh, wait, oh no, there's an extra taunt in the way.
And then they report a bug to Blizzard because clearly taunt is cheat, and they want to get that damage through to face.
This guy's toast.
Yeah, it's, I'm glad it's making its way back into the meta. It definitely deserves its spot, in my opinion.
Let's take a look at what the Meat Wagon has in store. It's going to be the Bronze Gatekeeper. Okay, sure, it's a taunt. Why not?
Yeah, not bad at all. Now,
there's the other
whatever on this turn. Ziliax, Stegodon, Mechano Egg into Bronze Gatekeeper. I think you can do pretty much whatever you want to do on this turn.
Christology now does nothing, but New Zealand doesn't care. They have the board. They have a board full of 3 3s.
Yeah, this game is over, as I think I was somewhat expecting, because Jack Attack, his deck does have so many taunts, so many high health taunts, that the Odd Rogue can really struggle to deal with, as we know. It was really getting through in that early window that was Tom 60229's only choice. And if we do go by that logic that he had to close out the game quickly, his play of making a 9-9 as quick as possible made a lot of sense. If the answer isn't there, he wins the game. If the answer is there, he wasn't winning anyway, so you may as well just get it over with.
If you are a New Zealand fan, now is the time to be spamming those cheers in chat. We want to see them as they take their first win against Derek's team, Chinese Taipei. And it's not looking good moving forwards either. It's going to be the Death Rattle Hunter versus Togwaggle Druid.
That is right. Not a matchup that I would like to be seeing, as the Togwaggle Druid. Generally a little bit more of an anti-slow control deck is the Togwaggle Druid, and also an aggro deck because it's just Druid and it just does Druid things. It's just a pretty good deck. It turns out Togwaggle Druid, but I would imagine not quite so much in this matchup where they have too much power on the board, too much ability to refill the board at all points in the game.
Yeah, let's take a look at this game and the other games coming up this series. Death Rattle Hunter versus Togwaggle Druid up next, then Control Priest versus Aggro Mage, even Warlock versus Shadowhawk Shaman, and finally Quest Rogue versus Odd Paladin. So we've talked through this matchup a little bit here, the Hunter versus the Druid. We've said that it's going to be a real struggle for the Druid to get through. But what about the rest of the series? Let's take a very quick gander at what's coming up. So Control Priest for New Zealand versus Aggro Mage for Chinese Taipei. What do you think?
This is a really weird one because we've seen this a few times in the global games, and before it, I think we might have seen it, I've casted it 2 or 3 times. Every time I've said, oh, Control Priest should be pretty firmly in the lead. It's an anti-aggro deck primarily. It's got Duskbreaker, the Pyromancer, Cleric, all those heals, sometimes an Omega Medic even thrown in there as well. But I think what we're finding is that the ability to draw through your whole deck so quickly as Aggro Mage with Arcane Intellect, Stargazer Luna, a Luneth in particular, if the answer for that card draw isn't there, there's just too much consistent play onto the board. Your Psychic Screams do nada because they just replay all their minions once again. They quite happily gobble up any minions you throw into their deck as well when they're drawing 3 cards a turn. So I think this is a lot closer than I would originally have given it credit for, but I would still probably have to put the Control Priest slightly in the lead just because you have such strong anti-aggro potential, and once you do lock down the board with those Twilight Drakes and Primordial Drakes, you're in a pretty good spot, I think.
I have to admit, so I'd spent the last few weeks sort of saying I don't really think Aggro Mage is one of the better decks at the moment, and people have been disagreeing with me, so I figured in my week off I'd better go home and actually try Aggro Mage properly and see what all the fuss is about. And yet, it really is the strength of these early game cards. If you get the Mana Worm into the Sorcerer's Apprentice, into Stargazer Luna, Duskbreaker doesn't deal with Luna, and it's kind of important to deal with the Luna, and it's very difficult for a lot of these decks, Priest being one of them, to actually deal with all of these threats as fast as they need to. And as you said, you get later on into the part where a Luneth gets played, then the crazy things can happen like Cosmic Anomaly with Sorcerer's Apprentices, with Arcane Missiles and all of that. It's pretty difficult for the Priest to survive unless they have Divine Hymns on tap.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's about getting back the health, but it's also about locking down the board. So important against Aggro Mage, or they will just continue to develop, and you won't be able to remove consistently enough. But in this next game that we have up in the Control Togwaggle Druid up against the Death Rattle Hunter, I would have to imagine that you're probably looking for pretty standard stuff as the Druid. You're just looking to ramp up, play that UI as quick as possible, draw your whole deck. Do you think there's the possibility for any creative plays through stealing your opponent's hand if we were to see some kind of nonsense through that?
We saw something like that in one of the Thursday night / Friday mornings, depending on where you are in the world, broadcasts, I believe. One of the players, I think it was one of the... It may have been Purple. He played a Tempo Togwaggle and then played Azalina. He managed to take his opponent's hand and get extra tempo with it because he then had a twig going off. So he was able to go something like Savannah Highmane, hit in the weapon, then make the 10 mana play with the powerful Hunter cards. And he was able to win through that. So there certainly are things that the Druid can do, and Chinese Taipei are going to need to find these outs, because the point I wanted to make when we were talking about the Priest versus Mage thing is that if the Priest wins that, this could be looking towards a 3-0 for New Zealand, and Chinese Taipei aren't going to want that to happen.
They are not, and they are clearly showing that they do not want it to happen because they've drawn Wild Growth Oaken Summons and a Nourish to boot as well.
And an Ironwood Golem, which maybe isn't so hot. Obviously, there are 2 Oaken Summons.
That one's less good, I would argue.
2 Ironwood Golems. If they draw the second one, the Oaken Summons won't do anything. That's unlikely, though. As on the other side of things, Pathra. Okay, double egg, cube, play dead, let's go.
Yeah, the second egg is a little bit less important, especially against Druid, where it's basically just giving your opponent another Scarab for 3 mana a lot of the time, off of the Spreading Plague, obviously. But the first one is so nice to get the ball rolling, just get those 5/5s on the board, and start smacking your opponent about the head with them.
Well, the thing that the second egg does do is it allows Pathra to just play the first egg on board without playing dead immediately, because if it gets dealt with, it doesn't matter. You then follow up with the second one. If it doesn't get dealt with, just hold on to the second one. Don't play it.
A fair point.
As the second Oaken Summon's drawn, that won't be doing anything, as the Ironwood Golems are the only 4 drops in the deck. Or rather 4 or lower mana cost minions in the deck.
And I know that on ladder, I really hate that Togwaggle Druids have started playing the Oaken Summons and Ironwood Golem package, because a couple of weeks ago, if you saw Oaken Summons and Ironwood Golem, you're like, right, brilliant, Taunt Druid, I know this. It's the only Druid deck that runs that package at the moment, because Malagos isn't really playing it anymore, Togwaggle was phasing it out, and then the really talented, good Togwaggle players like Elfandor and all these other people were like, yeah, it's good, guys, stop putting it back in, let's confuse Derek and laugh at him.
Is that their motive?
I would imagine so,
yeah.
Because the universe, don't know if you heard, revolves entirely around me.
I did hear that somewhere, actually. Probably from you.
Probably.
Oh, okay, Togwaggle and Dream Petal Florist drawn. But now the big question is this Nourish. Can it be played, and can it be played for mana when Shaxi has no card draw in his hand?
Yeah, it's a bit of a dangerous prospect. But when you're playing Togwaggle Druid, so much of your deck is card draw.
True.
If you hit Wild Growth once you're at 10 mana, Ferocious Howl, Branching Paths, Nourish, UI, even if you just hit Malfurion, that's a big mana sink that you can start plugging away and gaining yourself a whole bunch of armor, or probably actually going for attack to try and close out the game quickly.
From my perspective, I think the hand is valuable enough where you can just about afford to go for mana here. They've got an Ironwood Golem. They've got a Dream Petal Florist, which they can play nice and early to bank that Togwaggle discount for later on.
That's fair.
But there's definitely arguments for both sides here, because there is the very real possibility that Shaxi could whiff the next few draws and not get any card draw. He has gone with the mana, though, as I think I expected. And now let's see where that leads.
Yeah, it's a difficult choice, because the unspoken thing that the unspoken factor in this decision is that you always want to go for ramping when you can. It's just the better decision, to be honest. It leads to a victory the vast majority of the time, but if you don't have an Ultimate Infestation to back that up, or even just a Branching Paths or another Nourish, you can leave yourself stranded with no card draw.
But we are talking about a deck here that runs 2 Ferocious Howl, 2 Branching Paths, obviously 2 Nourish, 2 Ultimate Infestation as well. And as you said, Malfurion isn't card draw, but sort of is as good here, because it's a mana sink. It's a way of spending 2 mana every single turn after that to do something very powerful.
I did say that.
You did say that. I said you said that.
So a weird couple of turns, actually, here for New Zealand, because they don't really want to be throwing down the cube quite yet, because Egg itself is not a good cube target in this matchup. You want to be hitting bigger minions. You want to be hitting the actual 5/5 Devilsaur. You want to be hitting King Crush. Because if you're playing Play Dead on the cube and you're summoning eggs, that's very underwhelming. But clearly here, Patra's thinking, it's good enough for me at the moment to just get a few 5/5s down. She can go Play Dead on the other Devilsaur egg, or even Play Dead on the cube if she wants to get more eggs. This is a play, though, that while immediately it has pays big dividends, eventually will be slowing down her game plan quite drastically, because she's got 2 eggs in that cube instead of 2 Devilsaurs, 2 King Crushes, 2 Highmanes.
It's pretty weird, in particular against Druid. You mentioned earlier an extra egg is an extra spreading plague, and yeah, that is what that could be here. Against a deck like Odd Warrior, there can be merit to cubing an egg, because it messes up their Brawls and Reckless Flurries later on. It can really make clearing that board very awkward, but like I said, against Druid, having extra eggs on the board doesn't really achieve anything positive.
Yeah, it's not until the Mossy Horror comes down that it's really doing much of anything, as we can see, obviously, for New Zealand. They got that Mossy Boy in there, as is commonplace in pretty much every Hunter deck now. You just need a way to deal with them plagues. And until they do find that, however, this Playdead's kind of stranded. They don't want to be throwing it down on eggs, like we said, lest they buff up that plague.
And now is going to be as good a time as any to play that Dream Petal Florist. Playing this nice and early means that at any point, Chinese Taipei can go, surprise, we're swapping decks with you. This is the warning now. Only because it was played so early, New Zealand won't be expecting it anytime soon.
I find the Golden Dream Petal animation very disconcerting because her little glass thing, when it glows white, it kind of looks like her eye is popping out. Like, whenever I see it in the corner of my eye, I'm always like, God, that's not nice.
Oh, I see it now.
Yeah.
I never saw that before, but yeah.
Well, you're welcome. Obviously, it's not. It's just her cool Dr. Boom hyper-futuristic visor, but it looks gross, and I don't like it.
Chinese Taipei are now going to start to struggle, though, with their hand over the next few turns. They've got Wild Growth, so they do get to draw 2 cards next turn. As soon as they draw Ultimate Infestation or Nourish or even a Branching Path, they're in a slightly better position. But until then, it's going to be a bit of a struggle. They may have to play a Desperate Spreading Plague at some point. Maybe naturalize the Cube and then Spreading Plague.
Mm-hmm.
But playing the naturalizers early against any deck for Togwaggle Druid is something they don't really want to do. They want to be using the naturalize to kill their opponent after swapping decks with them.
Yeah, that is the ideal. But in order to do that first, you have to draw through your deck. You have to do it very quickly as well, lest you just die to this constant pressure. Because for New Zealand, I'm still skeptical, not necessarily critical, but hesitant about their play to go for the cube on the egg. But it's worked out for them in this instance because the removal has not been there. There's been no, there's been no Spellstones, no swipes, or anything to deal with these Devil Saws.
So Nourish drawn from Shaxi. It's not quite the Ultimate Infestation, which would have been perfect this turn to cleanly deal with the 5/5 and also draw the 5 cards. However, they are now very much in the game, and it looks like ramping up has paid off for them, at least, earlier on with the first Nourish.
Hovering over the Togwaggle, there is Chinese Taipei. It is a 1-mana 5/5 at the moment, so it's always worth considering playing that card from some point onwards. It is, however, basically still their main win condition.
I mean, if they had, say, the Arcane Tyrant, a Branching Paths as well, they could have potentially gone Spreading Plague, Tyrant, Togwaggle, Coin, Branching Paths for attack.
Yeah.
Because the tempo of that play would then prevent Pathra from switching decks back as she has to deal with it. So there are some very interesting things you can do with Togwaggle. You don't have to play it in the conventional sense as the win condition.
That's right. It still has the core, incredibly powerful Druid cards. You've got Malfurion, Plague, UI, Twig, all that good stuff. Ooh,
oh, 3 cards that...
Real tough choice.
3 cards that you do not want to be throwing out with tracking.
Katharina, how many cards are left for Patra in the deck? She is not opting to run Savannah Highmane, so it's just double Grizzly, I believe, left in the deck in terms of beasts to be summoned through Katharina, which is a surprisingly beast-light variant of the deck.
This is such a hard choice, because I'm now looking at it and thinking it has to be the cube.
I think it has to be the cube as well.
Because otherwise, where is Patra getting this game-winning value from? But losing Hellmaster, sure, losing Katharina, losing these key legendary minions is such a shame.
If they had the Mossy Horror in hand, I suppose they could consider cube on the cube, play dead on that cube to summon 2 more cubes, and then if they have a bunch of eggs, it doesn't matter because the plague can be destroyed through the Mossy Horror.
That'd be incredible.
But this, it's fine. They can destroy the 5/5 and end up with another one at the end of the turn. This is perfectly good enough for the moment.
However, things not looking good at all for Chinese Taipei now.
And worth pointing out that on their previous turn, after they'd gone with the Nourish, we could have seen a Starfall to take out the 5/5 Devil Saw, which would have led them to be in a less offensive position from their opponent. They instead decided to go for, I believe, Wild Growth, and I think there was a Ferocious Howl thrown in there as well. It's worked out okay for them because they have the Starfall now for damage, I suppose. Which does actually leave them with 1 more Spreading Plague, so this is quite cool, actually.
I really think Shaxi wants to see a Branching Paths here, because again, the player described last turn, the Plague, Tyrant, even Tog, Coin, Branching Paths, would be a very powerful play onto the board, but now, having to use the Coin with the Spreading Plague, this does work out very nicely, but it does prevent Tog being played on the same turn as the cards I described before.
A very nice, not so obvious play that it's worth pointing out from Chinese Taipei as well, of saving back the Arcane Tyrant for a turn last turn when they played Nourish, because you want to play it with Plague.
Yeah.
You don't want to be getting yourself one less Scarab off of that. You want to be getting as many as possible, and then pushing for a complete board clear, or as you pointed out, maybe a lot of burst damage.
Yeah, this is actually really nice.
There.
New Zealand aren't getting to the face anytime soon unless they draw Mossy Horror, which is
Yep.
again the reason Chinese Taipei would have loved to play Branching Paths on the same turn as the Spreading Plague, buffing up all of the Scarab's attacks to 3 and rendering Mossy Horror useless. It's just, there are so many merits to playing Branching Paths with the Plague.
So now for Patra, what's it going to be? King Crush is the main thing I'm looking at on this turn, because everything else looks to be a little lackluster, in my opinion. You've got no more cubes that you're trying to save it for to make some King Crush nonsense happen.
Yeah,
I suppose you're afraid of Naturalize on this turn?
I suppose. Grizzly's fine. I guess saving King Crush for the surprise attack at some point. Patra wants to be dealing with these plagues as quickly as possible.
Actually, no, sorry. Yeah, this is Taunts in the way, which protects your 5/2. So sorry. Yeah, this
Okay.
I guess does make more sense, because you weren't killing off all the 5/5s anyway. And you want to set yourself up for a potential Mossy Horror draw, obviously off the top. And even if that doesn't happen, you can still re-attack with these 5/2s, allowing yourself to dictate the trades.
So Shaxi with Ferocious Howl now, the only way of drawing a card. He somehow ended up in this position again where his hand is getting a little bit light. Where are these ultimate infestations loitering around in the deck?
Yeah, it's really what he needed a little while ago now. Oh man, or even just another swipe in hand would be really nice.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
Shaxi.
You could deal with literally everything except the cube that turn.
Yeah, you'd be very happy with that. But it's not a terrible position for Shaxi. He can go for Naturalize on the Grizzly, I suppose, to take these favorable trades.
Wow, okay, just going to drop the second Spreading Plague now. Play as defensively as possible and hope there's no Mossy Horror that would just end Shaxi right now.
Yeah, you can't really be. I mean, at no point in this matchup, unless you're so far ahead, can you afford to play around Mossy, because you just have to hope they haven't drawn it. But there it is, the Mossy Horror to close out the game for New Zealand. You hate to see that as a HQ Shaxi, and that is going to put Patra and New Zealand up to a 2-0 lead in this matchup.
Again, just failing to draw Ultimate Infestation, failing to draw Branching Paths. Chinese Taipei weren't able to get there. And now New Zealand take a 2-0 lead here. Next up, it's going to be Control Priest versus Aggro Mage. Things are looking dire for Chinese Taipei.
They are, and that was a match that I think probably was not going their way the majority of the time. But there were some things they could have done differently, it's worth saying. At the end there, maybe we could have seen a more aggressive play to take favorable trades rather than hoping that that Spreading Plague would protect you. It was unfortunate that Mossy Horror came off the top. I'm not trying to deny that, and they can't play around Mossy off the top, because the way that game's shaping out, at some point, Spreading Plague has to get the job done. It has to protect them for a turn for Togwaggle to be able to work. But as we saw there, Mossy off the top doing what it does so well against Druid and just closing out the game for a very surprising lethal for New Zealand.
All right, the score is 2-0. You know the drill by now. We are going to head to a short break, but the question is, can Chinese Taipei take this back and get a reverse sweep? I know that's what Dark's going to be hoping for. I know that that's what a lot of you watching is going to be hoping for. So nudge yourself closer to the fire. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. It's New Zealand versus Chinese Taipei. New Zealand currently winning 2-0 after getting a win with their Mech Paladin and Death Rattle Hunter. Now everything to play for from Chinese Taipei.
Yeah, if they lose this next game, they will be down to the losers bracket in Group C, which means they will be one series away from being eliminated from the Hearthstone Global Games. Now that we are in the top 16, once again we are trying to find our top 8 to get our competitors for the finals at BlizzCon later on in this year. And if New Zealand win this game, they will be one game closer. They will only need one more victory to get there and be playing in the finals.
It's going to be Ting Tong versus Shaxi. It's going to be Control Priest versus Aggro Mage. We've talked about this matchup a lot just before the break, but just to give you the brief rundown one more time, it's all about the Duskbreaker for the Control Priest.
Yeah, that is going to be a big factor in this game, at least in the early game. But what I've been finding so surprising in this matchup is my assumption was if you meet that check as the Control Priest, if you find the Duskbreaker and destroy their early boards, you've probably won the game. That's kind of what I was going into it expecting, because the Mage doesn't have that much refill afterwards. You have so much healing as well that the burst plan isn't likely to work. But we've kind of seen consistently that isn't actually the case. The Mage has so much staying power if they find Luna or a Luneth that the Priest struggles to deal with all of their constant pressure on the board.
All right, well, let's take a look. Kirin Mage in Roger's opening hand. Sorry, I said Shaxi. It's going to be Roger up now. Kirin Mage in Roger's opening hand with Counterspell. What do you think about that, Derek? Are these worth keeping? Does he throw away the secret and hopes to draw an Arcanologist? Or does he just want Mana Worms? It's kind of complicated.
I mean, Kirin Mage is kind of good in this matchup. It obviously has 3 health, so dies to the Duskbreaker, but so does everything.
Wow.
Mana Worm is slightly less impactful in this matchup because you can give your opponent Northshire Cleric value, but at the same time, it's still Mana Worm on 1. You still would like it in this matchup as you would in every other matchup. But I guess they're thinking, if I can't do anything on turns 1 or 2, that's just too slow.
Yep, that is fair. Drawing back the Kirin Mage anyway. I was surprised to see the full mulligan. Again, I think one of the real key cards in this matchup is actually Stargazer Luna. The fact that it costs 3 mana and has 4 health, can't deal with it with Duskbreaker alone, and obviously its absurdly powerful effect. Yep. When you take all of that into account, it does some pretty good work. New Zealand have Duskbreaker, but they don't have another dragon in the hand to proc the Duskbreaker.
And now taking a look at how this will actually play out now there is a Kirin Mage in hand for Roger, we can see another reason to not keep the Kirin Mage, which is just Pyromancer. If that is just played on turn 2, Kirin Mage is then awful. It's just not a good play because your opponent very happily trades up with their 2-drop into your 3-drop and they laugh all the way to the bank.
So Pyromancer has a very high win rate when taken from Primordial Glyphs that I've heard recently.
Pyroblast.
Pyroblast even, not Pyromancer.
It does. I've heard that as well. It's because you win when you play it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
However, Mirror Entity, I guess, is looking like the obvious pick here. It can counter a Duskbreaker by having Roger put his own 3/3 on the board at the same time. It can be played for free this turn with the Kirin Mage. But there's Mana Worm pickup.
Yeah, it's a little bit more spicy now. If you truly believe in the heart of the cards, you can see a Cinderstorm here. 4/5 perfect hits. Obviously,
I don't believe in the heart
that is not a sustainable solution. Yeah, that is not going to be working in any reasonable outcome. So getting the Mana Worm on the board, trying to get this board rolling, maybe stick an Arcane Anomaly as well in the best case scenario.
Ting Tong still doesn't have a dragon to activate that Duskbreaker in his hand. That could be a problem over the next few turns. Ting Tong's going to want to draw as many cards as he can. So maybe it's just trade the Mana Worm, heal the Cleric back up. I'm not seeing anything better here unless he wants to just drop the Acolyte.
Yeah, I think he just wants to get drawn through to that dragon. Acolyte just gets value traded very likely by the Mana Worm on the next turn anyway. I don't think you can afford to go coin Swampoos here, even though it's a good minion on the board, because if they play a Luneth, you need that acidic Swampoos to deal with it. You need it. It's not like Druid where you can gain 20 armor in its turn. You can only have so much healing in one turn as the Priest.
Okay, downside to playing Luna now is that it's weak to Duskbreaker. A Cleric can be traded into it, and then Duskbreaker could go off. The potential upside, though, is, well, they draw a card immediately. If there's no Duskbreaker, it probably sticks.
If you go just Arcane Anomaly and there's a Duskbreaker, you're still kind of sad because it clears off the board, but they have to kill off both of their own clerics in that scenario. Both clerics die anyway, I guess. You may as well draw a card in the process.
Yeah, and the good news with this play as well is that if there is a Duskbreaker, then Roger still does have a 3/3 at the end of the turn. He's still looking okay.
And if there isn't a Duskbreaker, brilliant. You probably just won the game because you are going to be drawing so many cards.
That's not a dragon.
Ooh. I think this is what the kids would call an epic fail.
Yeah, that's what we used to call it when I was at school.
Yeah.
Don't think the kids now would call it that, would they?
They'd probably call it a floss dab eat or something.
Wow.
Pain, speak to me.
I learn a lot from you sometimes, Derek.
Yeah, just gonna be having to leave this Luna alive. And this is so much card draw. If Chinese Taipei even end up with a card on the right-hand side that they cannot play, that Acolyte of Pain can just bump in, draw them another card, and hopefully get themselves in a situation where they can play the next card in hand. Like this. So what? You just bump it along, play the next one.
Oh, I guess Roger's deciding that actually getting this explosive runes down is better, maybe.
I guess.
I don't know, though. It's still not playing around Duskbreaker. There doesn't seem to be any way of...
You may as well bump it, right? Like, nah, unless you want to push this all face. I guess that's worth considering. You are an aggro mage after all.
And bumping the opponent's Acolyte does put the opponent closer to Duskbreaker as well.
That's true. If you go all face, they only get one card draw immediately.
There's certainly merit to not giving New Zealand card draw. Yeah, I think I ever so slightly prefer this. Although it's always fun to watch Luna go off. If this Luna survives until next turn, who knows? We may see a Sorcerer's Apprentice. Which is where Luna really goes off.
Fair enough. And, you know, clearly here Roger is saying that there is no Duskbreaker for my opponent. And there we go. It's turned yellow. We know that that next card is going to be a dragon. Primordial Drake off the top means this is finally a complete board clear, and I mean a complete board clear for New Zealand with the runes knocking about as well, ready to take out that Duskbreaker. This Duskbreaker has actually functioned a lot like a Hellfire because it did 3 damage to himself and it blew up the whole board. It's only missing 3 damage to his opponent.
Slightly worse Hellfire then.
Yeah, got rid of the spell though. That's the secret.
Now though, Cosmic Anomaly is able to run riot with this Arcane Missiles and the Mirror Entity as well. And next turn, if the 4/3 survives, then Cinderstorm will be hitting for 7 damage. And yeah, unless New Zealand want to coin out Psychic Scream, this is going to be surviving.
I think Roger is trying to emote in some way the same thing you are alluding to of it's looking like he was going bam, 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 which is probably what Cosmic Anomaly does. It does just kind of go bam, bam, bam when you play Missiles or Cinderstorm.
Yeah.
Or maybe he was speaking Mandarin, I'm not sure.
More like bam, 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 bam.
Oh, yeah.
That was for missiles. 5 bams.
Yeah, no, I heard a knock on the side of the wall and I was wondering if that was Lorinda smashing on the wall. Bam, bam, bam. As the Psychic Scream comes down to deal with just the Cosmic Anomaly, because when you have no minions on board, the Cinderstorm, the missiles, it's way too scary to be leaving up.
Yeah.
And New Zealand, they have such a full hand, they just have to start playing these cards. I can respect this play a lot.
Now it's complicated though. Like Roger could play Cinderstorm counterspell, given that the coin's just been used. Gonna go with a ping instead, just try and maximize damage output.
Oh yes.
He wants to be drawing a Luneth. He wants to be drawing Cosmic Anomaly again as quickly as possible. He needs the value now.
So it's becoming fairly obvious at the moment that there is no Luneth available to Chinese Taipei quite yet.
Yep.
Because I believe they would have played it last turn quite simply. Cinderstorm ping is probably worse than an Luneth on that turn. So New Zealand maybe have the ability to go for an Acidic Swampoo sometime soon if they want to start developing onto the board. But even then, I would imagine they are going to be somewhat hesitant before they start doing so.
Ting Tong taking a little while to choose this one. You have to imagine that he wants to heal as much as possible, though he does go with the Holy Fire. I guess that is an extra way of dealing with cosmic anomalies, which is maybe the most vital part of that pick. He doesn't have another way of dealing with them apart from another Psychic Scream, which you're just going around in circles at that point.
Good point. A strong piece of single target removal, even just on a Mana Worm, that's fine.
Okay, double Fireball. That's 12 damage. 13 with the ping available next turn. So Chinese Taipei sort of are under the illusion of getting close, but with Holy Fire in hand and with the Priest Hero power going off every turn, it's not quite that simple.
But it's worth pointing out that that mystery secret, which we know to be Mirror Entity, to Ting Tong, I believe he has only crossed off Counterspell off of the list because he hasn't targeted a spell on a minion for Spellbender. He hasn't played anything for runes, Mirror Entity, or Frozen Clone as well, or Explosive runes.
He's not hit the face for Vaporize and Ice Barrier.
So he's going to be very hesitant to play a Primordial Drake because, hey, if it is a Mirror Entity, you're pretty sad then.
And there you go. The truth is out. It's now just a 2-4.
The cat's out of the bag.
A 2-4 which Ting Tong cannot deal with this turn, though, which means that is 2 extra damage.
So, Primordial Drake, if it had been played and you are met with... you can't actually really deal with a Primordial Drake, even though it wouldn't have been able to attack face on that turn. I think it would have been a little bit too sad to have that knocking you about on the board, because as soon as they deal with your Primordial Drake through the use of spells, you have a 4/8 smacking you in the face every turn that you can't deal with.
Celestial Emissary has been a little bit less popular over the last few weeks of the Hearthstone Global Games, most teams favouring Mana Addict and Flame Geysers instead. But hey, adding 2 extra damage to the Fireballs in the hand, or one of the Fireballs in the hand, doesn't seem too bad.
Yeah, I wonder if Roger will try and go for a more board control-ish style of play.
Maybe a Shooting Star?
Yeah.
I don't know how much that achieves.
Because, what, if you launch everything face and they play one Omega Medic, they just got a card off Shadow Visions, which is very likely Holy Fire or the Divine Hymn. That's a lot of healing, and you have to have a backup plan for that, and right now they don't really have one.
Omega Medic isn't playable, or the Battle Cry isn't playable until turn 10.
But you're not killing them next turn, are you?
No,
even with
not.
Celestial Emissary. Very likely, anyway.
Emissary, Fireball face, ping, that's 9. Say they draw Anomaly next turn. No, they're still not quite close. So, yeah,
I like this.
You're right.
They've realized they have to do one of 2 things. Lock down board control pretty heavily, or draw a Luneth, and have there be no answer. Even anticipating a potential Primordial Drake.
Board control just isn't going to happen. Look at this Cabal Shadow Priest taking the 2/4 Twilight Acolyte. It was all part of the plan when he played the Twilight Acolyte in the first place.
And this is a little bit more how I would imagine this game going.
Yeah.
When I first started casting this matchup towards the beginning of the Global Games, or at least towards the start of the Boomsday project release, in that the Mage gives it a good go, stick a few minions on the board, get a little bit of pressure going, but then inevitably New Zealand on the Control Priest find the answer, regain board control pretty much irreparably at this point. Chinese Taipei is not going to be swinging this back, and then they just kind of run their opponent out of stuff. Eventually, maybe they get lethal with Shadow Reaper Anduin. They don't really need to, though. They're just going to lock down board, chip away at their opponent, and win through just running their opponent out of stuff.
It's like we set up at the start, though. It sort of all came down to that Duskbreaker. If the Primordial Drake wasn't drawn that turn to deal with Luna, then Roger would have drawn a lot more cards, and maybe this game would have gone a very, very different way. But because the Duskbreaker was available, because there was another dragon in the hand, hey, New Zealand fans watching, if you haven't done your cheers yet, get ready, because it looks like they are about to take this series.
And I think from Chinese Taipei, I can respect their play of going for... that was one of the biggest turns, is when they had the Luna on the board, they could have either gone for bumping the Acolyte to draw another card and try and keep the cycle going, or stick the Kirin Tor Mage and push everything face. if they bumped their Acolyte of Pain, they would have drawn their opponent a card as well, which probably got their opponent closer to a Duskbreaker, which they did not believe New Zealand had, or they would have played it on the previous turn. So I think this usually would have worked out a bit better for Roger and Team Chinese Taipei. However, the Duskbreaker was obviously there to clear up the board, stop any card draw, and we can clearly see, even if a Luneth was found, it ain't going to be enough for this time. Ting Tong here, even throwing down a heal on a minion.
Wow.
How novel.
Well, with the Holy Fire in his hand, a second Holy Fire in the deck, Divine Hymns are knocking around somewhere as well. It's looking like the correct call there. As Roger can now, if he wants to, play his entire hand. He can go Anomaly, Shooting Star, 5 missiles, and then an 8 damage Fireball, but I don't know, Derek. It's not looking good, is it?
What to do?
It's not looking great. Or good.
Or even okay.
Even middle.
I'd say it's not even looking bad. It's looking pretty abysmal, actually.
You'd say it's not bad?
No, it's worse than that.
I wonder.
Yeah, just wondering about sequencing here, I guess, for Roger. How do you have to go Fireball on the
Drake?
Primordial Drake?
And then just missiles and hold back the Shooting Star?
Or just go then Shooting Star Missiles, which pretty much guarantees you a board clear. I guess if you're hoping to clear off the board, you're fine with putting the Fireball into the Primordial Drake anyway, because then that's less missiles that are going into the Drake, more going to the face. So it's still pretty much the same amount of damage anyway.
So it's just the shooting, like playing the Shooting Star and not hitting both minions with it is a waste of damage?
That's true, that's true. Or just going for this way, he's saying there is no ability for you to clear this off anyway on this turn. There has to be no board clear here.
Roger wishes that were the case. Though there is a second Psychic Scream, there is a Holy Fire, there's even a second Divine Hymn that's now been drawn. Goodbye. Only real remaining threat in Roger's deck.
Yeah.
I should imagine, depending on what this draw is, it's just a Frostbolt. That should pretty much be it. Do you think he plays this one out?
I mean, maybe if he draws a Luneth from where he sat, he thinks he can win the game. Glyph into Book of Scroll of Wonders.
Into Pyroblast, 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 Pyroblast.
It's an out. It's granted, it's not the best out ever. Arguably, it's the worst out ever. But you always have to say it. It's like the good old, he could draw Yogg days. You never know. Unless, has he played both Glyphs, actually? He played one?
They're both mirror entities.
Both mirror entities?
Both of them were mirror entities, yeah.
Well, don't I look a fool?
One summoned a Duskbreaker, one summoned the Twilight Acolyte.
Oh yeah, right you are.
No, sorry, one summoned Acolyte of Pain, the other one summoned Twilight Acolyte.
Yes, that is correct.
Has betrayed me.
And now New Zealand going on the offensive, closing out this game before anything can even happen. Not that there really is anything left for Chinese Taipei, and much to my chagrin, it does look like my pick in Chinese Taipei are going to be knocked down to the lower bracket in the Hearthstone Global Games.
Definitely not the result that I think we were expecting coming into the series. Again, without the knowledge of the picks and bans, etc. You did say that, I think you said Chinese Taipei and USA were looking like the likely teams to get through in this group. Well, Chinese Taipei are going to struggle.
And to their credit, New Zealand have just been playing good Hearthstone
yeah, for
here
sure.
today. I've been very nitpicky with what I've been talking about, trying to find something that I didn't like about their play. I was talking about cubing on an egg, which maybe wasn't perfect, but it still gave them a lot of pressure. It wasn't a bad play at all.
A little bit of swag there from Ting Tong, though. He wants the cheers, and they have deserved them. New Zealand getting their first win in the double elimination bracket. They are now one series away, potentially, from BlizzCon.
That's right. They are going to be going up against either Singapore or the USA, I believe, as we will be finding out later today who they will be facing against. I believe the USA are playing against Singapore. Later on in the day, obviously, the other two teams, the other two countries in Group C That's going to be another close one. I would, again, imagine that USA are going to be finding their way through, but Singapore are no slouches either, as I believe we're going to be taking a look at the matchup that we just saw. A pretty one-sided one, but still an exciting one nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. With Mech Paladin taking down Odd Rogue with some very well-timed Pyromancer quality action there. Then Patra on the Death Rattle Hunter beating Togwaggle Druid. No real surprise there. But then Ting Tong doing the Dusky Boy thing, playing Duskbreaker, and just outlasting Roger on the Mage.
I thought the Dusky Boy thing was losing.
Whew. Oh.
That one's for you, Ike. Who probably isn't watching, but there you go anyway.
You're just secretly a member of Team Wiener, aren't you?
Don't tell anyone.
Okay, my bad. Let's take a look at some of the best moments from the series that we just watched. There can't be many of them. It was not a long series.
It was not indeed. This was really the one question mark for me in New Zealand's lineup. Not to say that it was bad, but to be honest, I have not seen it that much. It is not a popular Tier 1 deck at the moment. But having seen this matchup played out, even though it's probably the first time I've seen Egg Mech Paladin against Odd Rogue, it looked fairly one-sided. There was just little that Chinese Taipei could do. They went in for one big gambit with the Blood Knight, but after the equality came down, it was taunt after taunt after taunt, locking out the game for New Zealand.
Then the Death Rattle Hunter did Death Rattle Hunter things, and Chinese Taipei really tried to get these big spreading plagues, but they weren't able to draw an Ultimate Infestation early enough for it to have an impact, and they weren't able to draw a Branching Path to buff up the spreading plague and reduce the threat of Mossy Horror. Mossy Horror, which did eventually come down, as I'm sure you're about to see, for lethal.
And even if the Mossy Horror wasn't there, I think it's worth pointing out now, as I don't think we highlighted it enough during the game, Patra probably was winning that game anyway. They were just in a really nice spot with their constant pressure. The Togwaggle win condition wasn't really anywhere near active.
Yeah, that is true. Then finally, Ting Tong on the Control Priest was able to control the board nicely. Duskbreaker coming down on turn 5 thanks to the Primordial Drake draw. And yeah, while Explosive Runes did then deal with the Duskbreaker, while Chinese Taipei were able to drop Cosmic Anomaly and play Arcane Missile straight after, Psychic Scream cleaned that up. And eventually, New Zealand found lethal thanks to Shadow Reaper Anduin and 2 copies of Mind Blast.
Yeah, pretty decisive game there for Ting Tong. It's not the way we've seen this matchup play out often in the global games, but I think the main reason why it goes differently is because the Mage will find Luneth and the Priest will not find their Weapon Destruction. There we can see it was the other way around. The Weapon Destruction was there, Luneth wasn't even there, so the Ooze didn't even need to be played for the whole game. But it was just pretty simple Hearthstone there for New Zealand. They got both Clerics, they got a Duskbreaker as well. Very nice, easy game to close things out.
Great performance from New Zealand indeed. Now let's have a chat with Jack Attack and see what he thought of that game of the Hearthstone Global Games now. Hey Jack Attack, congratulations for that very decisive victory against Chinese Taipei. You are 1 series away from BlizzCon. How's that?
That is pretty good and pretty unexpected because we actually lost to Taiwan and we lost to Singapore in the earlier stages. So we thought like this is going to be rough, and then bang, 3-0, perfect key order, GG.
So what were you doing differently against Taiwan this time? Did you go for a different lineup strategy? Did they bring what you expected them to bring, or was it just the matchups falling in your favor?
Yeah, well, last time the key order was like really awful, and this time the key order was really good. So like that was already just like straight off the bat really the best advantage you can have. And also they kind of just picked in the same order and drafted in the same order they did last time. So we just predicted that, and then they sort of just fell into place, really.
So did you put a lot of work into prepping for Chinese Taipei specifically?
Not really. Like in general, you bring what's good against the field. Like we will play more games against Taiwan probably, but like you can't really put too much effort into countering people in this sort of format with like 9 classes and all the sort of random RNG elements that go into the pick orders and whatnot.
So take me through as well. I think you, Falcone and I could agree, the coolest deck in your lineup, the Mech Egg Paladin. Whose idea was that, and how did it get through the committee voting process to get into the lineup?
Okay, so I wanted to bring OTK Paladin. I'm a big Exodia Paladin fan.
Of course you
Mage
did.
wanted to bring Mech Paladin. No one wanted to bring Odd Paladin. We're like, we're over that. That's boring. We've played it enough. We lose with it. Screw it. So we're gonna bring something else. And that was the first game we've played of it, and we're like, this is so cool. Just make the biggest, fattest taunt you possibly can, and then just bang, GG easy, no silences, get wrecked.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. When there's no owls or spell breakers, you're probably winning with that deck.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, congratulations. It all paid off. We will see you again a little bit later on Jack Attack. One more win for BlizzCon. Good luck.
Cheers.
Oh, awesome. Well, it's good to hear a little bit about the Paladin shenanigans they had going on behind the scenes. I agree with them. Odd Paladin's boring.
Odd Paladin is a little bit passé now, and I also just love, in the New Zealand accent, big fed taunts. Big feddies. It's not a good New Zealand accent, I apologise.
On that note,
Jack Attack did it better.
let's take a look at the bracket one more time as it's now been updated. And as you can see, New Zealand have moved forward. They have the winners match to play up against the winner of Singapore versus the United States later on. The loser of Singapore versus the United States will be playing against Chinese Taipei, and the loser of that game will be eliminated.
That's right, and the winner of that game will be going up against the loser of New Zealand versus Singapore or United States. You're starting to see why we had a lot of to-be-decideds on the schedule page on the community show yesterday, but I cannot wait to see who they will be facing against, which we will be finding out later on today.
Next up, Lorinda and Gaskin are going to be bringing you Hong Kong versus the United Kingdom. I'm very excited to watch that one. I've got a few of my cheers ready for the United Kingdom, I've got to admit. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back very shortly.